Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of the Data Driven Trades video, where I will be diving into Google LSA performance for July. So over the course of 2024, LSAs have been pretty volatile, up and down lead volumes, customer acquisition costs starting out low at the beginning of the year, which is pretty untraditional. Historically, it's usually expensive and then it gets cheaper and cheaper, with some spikes in April, some revenue volume drops in April. So it's been a bit all over the place. So I have been advising contractors and agencies to just pay attention to this for your business, because it hasn't been as reliable of a source for consistent revenue as it has been in the past. So for this sample, we're looking at 25 businesses across the US. Shout out to Josh Crouch and Relentless Digital for partnering with us to be able to share these trends with you. I am just going to do a quick refresher of June performance, just some of the highlights. So spend increased 18% in June. Conversions increased 44%. Customer acquisition cost was $280.93. Average tickets were $3,800. Return on ad spend potential was 20.9x. So for every dollar spent, $20.90 in revenue opportunity earned. And then ROAS closed was an 8.6x. So for every $1 spent, $8.60 in closed revenue was driven in return. Now, as I get into July data, just keep in mind that spend decreased 16% from June to July, which typically means a reduction of demand, because Google LSAs are a cost per lead model. You pay a fixed price for a lead, which you then validate or invalidate. So whenever we see spend increase, there's probably more external demand from this channel. When it decreases, there's usually less, and lo and behold, conversions from GLSAs decreased by 10% from the prior month. Now, that's not such a bad thing, because if we look at the 3 prior months, we saw some pretty significant conversion volume increases. So 63% from March to April, 19% from April to May, and then 44% from May to June. So when you think of looking kind of at January to July, we had a really, really big spike in lead volume, despite the fact that, yes, it pulled back by 10% in this current month. So when we look at this chart, we can see that January started off strong with book jobs, which again is pretty atypical. Usually at the beginning of the year, we start a little bit slower, but again, it depends on weather patterns. So we came down in February to a bottom of the number of book jobs, and then we've slowly, steadily increased, peaking in June, coming back a little bit in July, but June and July are significantly higher than the next highest month, which is May. So both of these months have been really, really strong. And then additionally, the book rate, the match rate, and paying customer rate on active customers all increased slightly, about 2.5% from June to July. Those active customers that you were working in this month converted at higher rates in those important points in the funnel. While the volume of revenue opportunity generated from GLSAs did decrease month over month, July still produced strong ROAS numbers compared to June, and it produced a higher revenue volume, which we will get into. So LSAs drove a 19.1x return on ad spend potential in July. So for every dollar spent, you had the opportunity to earn $19.10. Now, we know that you're not going to close 100% of the opportunities when you get into the home. But again, we can look at this chart and see that June and July are head and shoulders above the rest of the months for this year. You can see a little bit of that volatility with some odd peaking in February and March, with actually a decline in April despite that lead volume increase, and then back up in May, peaking in June, coming back down a little bit in July. We saw a 109% increase in ROAS potential from January to July, which is a big win. However, the total revenue opportunity did decrease 26% month over month. But 75% of that total revenue opportunity converted to sold and closed revenue. So despite less volume of sellable opportunities, the conversion rates to sold and closed were higher. So closed revenue increased by 13%. The contractors in this sample had less opportunity to work with, but were able to produce more closed revenue at the end of the day, because again, more of those opportunities converted to sold or closed. So there's different levers that you can pull. Just because lead volume goes down or revenue opportunity goes down for a channel does not mean that your fate is sealed. There's still operational things that you can do to maximize that opportunity and even beat prior months. Now looking at the ROAS for July, we know that spend was less, but we also know that July produced 13% more closed revenue opportunity. The ROAS was the highest of 2024 at an 11.6x return on ad spend closed revenue. So for every dollar spent, $11.60 was earned, and this is up 241%. January started low. That's expected. That was below a 4x ROAS. That's when I think things were getting a little bit dicey with GLSAs, when then it popped back up in February, in March. Then we had the decline in April, which is where I think people started to panic a little bit, because that's the start of the summer season. Why is this going down again? That's why you should have backup channel mix plans in case LSAs gets a little volatile in your market. Shot back up in May. Ironically came down in June, but that's because spend increased from May to June and then shot back up in July. So overall, we have this up into the right trend, but a little volatile. And as I've mentioned before, close ROAS, as much as I love that metric, it is only one part of the story. You also need to compare that to revenue volume. In July, ROAS was up, but also, as I mentioned, revenue volume was up. This is a win-win because, for example, if you were to get a 100x ROAS on a marketing channel, your agency, your team, your director of marketing, they might celebrate and say, this is amazing. But if that only generates $2,000, what percentage of your total target for the month is that, right? We want to find that balance where we're able to generate a significant volume while maintaining the best ROAS that we can. So GLSAs generated just over $30,000 of closed revenue per location in this sample for July, which I think is a great balance where we're double-digit ROAS, we're 5 figures in terms of closed revenue. That is going to contribute to your overall revenue target. And then additionally, it costs $253.82 to acquire a paying customer from LSAs in July, which is the lowest of the year so far, slightly beating February, where it was $264. Again, little volatility here, a little bit of an atypical pattern. Typically, the beginning of the year is when it's most expensive. So January, February were relatively low, didn't generate a lot of volume. Then we saw a spike in March and April, which again, March might make sense with shoulder season, but April, I was surprised that it went up. But now we've been on a steady downtrend, bottoming out in July when we typically bottom out in June. So weather cycles can adjust this, but typically the summer months is when it's least expensive to acquire paying customers from various marketing channels. We're seeing 40% decrease from April to July. So that customer acquisition cost has almost come down by half since April. My final point about GLSAs is that volume-wise, it's not going to necessarily compete with PPC or organic, but it is a pretty important part of the channel mix because, as we saw, $30,000 is not a small number. It's not a huge number. It's not going to necessarily help you make your month, but you do want to capitalize on this digital real estate. It's been a little bit volatile, so come August, maybe some of these numbers change. You want to be thinking about, okay, if I'm seeing in the data that GLSAs is really pulling back like it has in some months this year, what are we going to do with that budget? Do we want to pivot it into something else or stand pat? Those are the types of things you want to be thinking about because each month starts anew. It's hard to predict. Yes, we can show you trends, but looking at this, some of these trends were atypical. So staying on top of the data, being prepared to pivot your marketing mix to meet the needs of the customers where they are. Maybe we have a spike in customers are just using GLSAs. Maybe the following month it's organic. The next month it's PPC. You want to just be following those trends so that you can deploy your budgets tactically. Talk to you next week.